Howdy. I am technologically disadvantaged, and so I'm going to just attempt to record the high point of chapter 8 for you. So bear with me, gang. This has been quite a traumatic experience switching from face-to-face class to live. Anyway, chapter 8, external selection, part 1. Let me define external selection. It's referring to the assessment and evaluation of external job candidates or job applicants. Selection is equated with one event, and that's the interview. Okay? Selection is also a process. It's guided by logic. And there is a sequence of the selection process, and that's being the applicant, then the candidate, then the finalist, and then the offer receiver. When we talk about external selection, we have to talk about the logic of prediction. And that holds logic of prediction, or LOP, that indicators of a person's degree of success in past situations should be predictive of how successful he or she will be in new situations. Logic of prediction demonstrates how critical it is to carefully scrutinize an applicant's past situations when making selection decisions. And the example that the text gives, which I think is a really great way of showing logic of prediction, is that you are going to select somebody for a police officer. And so you have a candidate or an applicant who has security officer experience. They've been a security guard for a bank or a department store or whatever. And so you as the recruiter, interviewer, you are looking at this person saying, well, hey, they're a good candidate because they have those types of experiences being a security guard, which would be good to be a police officer, right? You know, they troubleshoot, they have to multitask, and analyze situations to decide what it is that they want to do. So if, say for instance, a homemaker, stay-at-home mom, Mr. Mom or a mom comes along and they apply for the police officer position, and most reactions from most people are, there's no way, you're not qualified, why are you even wasting our time and yours? But think about it. Homemakers, they are just as skilled as a police officer. A mom or stay-at-home mom has a job that requires troubleshooting. A lot of times you're trying to handle kids, or cook a meal, stop a water leak. Heaven knows what you have to do. And so you're always on, just like a police officer is. So we can't, if we are doing the selection process, we cannot discount non-experience in the home, or in the community, or in any other institution. Those are just as valuable as previous employment experience. So when you guys are out there and you're interviewing new graduates here in the next 6 to 8 months, and they don't have any work experience, we can't negate the experience they may have in extracurricular activities in organizations or whatever it may be. Anyway, that's logic of prediction. That's basically what it is. I mean, we have to be logical about it. We have to be open-minded about people's experiences and how that might apply to the job that we're trying to fill. Okay? So anyway, logic of prediction is a point-to-point comparison that needs to be made between the requirements of the job to be filled and the qualifications of the applicant. And what qualifications they may have from past experiences. If applicants see the selection process as being job related, which should occur if you are using logic of prediction, they're more likely to view the selection process as being fair. And then lastly, logic of prediction means we separate recruitment from selection. We have now moved from the recruiting side to the selection side. Now, when we're doing selection, there are some predictors that we need to be mindful of. One is content, and within content, there are 3 predictors within content. You have sign, and sign is a predisposition of the person that is sought to relate to performance on the job. A sample is closer than a sign to actual on-the-job results. Okay. And criterion is a very close to the actual job performance, such as sales during a probation period for a new employee. We also have speed versus power. A person's score on some predictors is based on the number of responses. I'm going to be looking at your assessment scores, and that's going to be a speed test. Basically, how you respond to certain questions within a certain amount of time. Or you can have a power test, which presents individuals with items that increase in difficulty. So the farther you get into the difficult questions or challenges, the better. And then, let's see. We have a paper and pencil versus performance. So paper and pencil would be like taking assessment test, honesty test, integrity test, cognitive test. That's your paper and pencil type of test. And then you have performance. It's where, like, say, if you are applying to be a firefighter, there are some performance tests that you have to complete in addition to the paper and pencil test. You have objective versus essay. We all know what those are. Objective measures knowledge in a certain area, and essays are assessing that written communication, problem solving, and analytical skills. So that's the beauty of an essay question to get somebody to respond to. And then we have oral versus written. If a job requires high levels of verbal skills, oral responses should be solicited. And if the job requires a large amount of writing, you probably want to get some written responses to see how the person writes. And then if it requires constant interaction with the computer, you may have the applicant actually use a computer to enter their responses. So those are some predictors that you are utilizing when you are starting your selection process. The selection process has 3 steps. Of course, the first one is the KSAOs are written and should directly come from your job requirements matrix or your job analysis. Second, for each KSAO, yes or no is written to show whether it is needed, if you need to assess it. And then third, possible methods of assessment are listed for the required KSAOs, and the specific method to be used for each is indicated. So there you go. You have the selection process or the selection plan, and then you've got a sequence. So you've got, now we're switching gears. You got a candidate, someone who possesses the minimum qualifications to be considered for further assessment. but they have not received any type of offer. They are just merely a candidate. Your initial assessment methods that you use, those are the ones that you choose the candidates. Then you determine which candidates are going to move to the finalist position. And the finalist is someone who meets all the minimum qualifications, just the minimum qualifications, and the organization considers them qualified for the job. And the third decision that happens in your selection sequence is to determine which of the finalists will receive the job offer. Okay? And an offer receiver is the finalist to whom the organization extends the offer of employment. So if we back up to initial assessment methods, those are used to minimize the cost associated with the substantive assessment methods by reducing the number of people you're assessing. So you're taking that applicant pool that you've pulled in, and you have done your initial interview, and then your pool's been reduced, and now you give them assessment methods, initial assessment methods. You look at their resumes and cover letters. You look at their applications. You look at their biographical data. You look at references and background checks, and then the results of any interview, any initial interview, whether it's a phone interview, video interview, whatever it may be. On those resumes and covers letters, those are usually your first introduction. You may not have even done an interview yet, so you're looking at that resume and cover letters. And I think as long as you are truthful on your resume, you'll be just fine. Resumes and cover letters need to be verified. You can do this with background checks. You need to ensure that the info on there is accurate, and we've talked about this before. A lot of times people will fudge on their resumes, and this is not good, because then they might go into a job that they're really not qualified for. And a major issue with resumes as a selection tool is the volume, also that it creates for the organization. The organization has to basically go through all of those resumes. Now, I don't know if you recall from our Rhine presentation that Erica mentioned that she gets so many resumes. She said, be sure to put words and things that will trigger her to look at your resume. That doesn't really mean that you have to redo every resume every time you apply, but make sure that your resume is eye-catching, okay? Video resumes, they are getting some attention in the business world. I think some of you have indicated that you have done those. I would find them very disconcerting, because I'm obviously not very comfortable with doing this as well. But self-promotion can be viewed easily with a video-based resume. But also video-based resumes could diminish hiring outcomes, because sometimes employers might view, they might interject, I should say, subjective biasing. The appearance of the person, the race of the person, if they appear to have a disability, and that will impact the decision. I think it's sort of 6 of one and half dozen of another as to whether you utilize video resumes. And as we've mentioned before, resumes have an advantage of allowing applicants to control info presented to the employer. Resume fabrication and distortions, we know they're prepared by the applicant, so they're controlled by the applicant, and there's no set in stone format. And applicants want to present themselves in the most favorable light, and distortions are a significant problem with resumes. A website called Resume Doctor has found that nearly 42.7% of resumes have significant inaccuracies. And there's also a background checking agency has found 56% of resumes contain a falsehood of some sort or another. According to one survey, the biggest areas of distortion in a resume are inflated titles, inaccurate dates to cover up job hopping or employment gaps, half-finished degrees, inflated education, purchase degrees. So the best way to combat resume fraud or fudging is to conduct careful background checks. I may have mentioned it once before. Sometimes it's just, does it pass the smell test? Does this really seem like a wise tool to utilize to make a decision? Okay, so how do you get your resume noticed? Make sure you don't have any typos and any other minor mistakes. Those can kill your chances. If somebody sees a typo, they're going to shut down. They're not going to look at it. They might even toss it to the side. Customize your resume to the position if at all possible. Recognize that brevity is very valued among hiring managers. Many will not read resumes that are longer than 1 to 2 pages. Some won't even read one if it is longer than 1 page. Be factual and truthful, and take care to be truthful. Resume is not time to underplay any accomplishments, but don't list job duties. Identify accomplishments, things that you have done that are very applicable to this job you're applying for. Consider your impact in a division or a group. Would something have happened or not happened if you hadn't been there? What are you proudest of? And demonstrate skills that you've gotten in college that would work in the job you're applying for. One of the examples in the text says that Accenture, their global head of recruiting, said he likes to look for teamworking skills in hiring. So all the teamwork, group work that you've done, you could utilize that with your resume. So classwork, and especially if you got something that was really noteworthy. Say if you were working with the philanthropy class and you raised money to produce a I don't know, let's look at the stars. You raised money enough to build a Habitat for Humanity house. That, I would put that on my resume. It's something that you should use. Also, when you submit a resume electronically, I believe Erica said make sure it's PDF and it has your name on it. So like Saladino resume, 03/25, 2020. Make sure it's scan ready. So don't use any fancy fonts and formatting. Form should follow function. Okay? Let's see. All right. Application blanks or applications. Let's see what you would need to know there. Level of education is one element of education performance that's used to predict job performance, which means attainment of a degree. GPAs are most valid in predicting early job performance. They, after about 3 to 5 years, GPAs are not looked at too much anymore. Quality of school is the reason a lot of recruiters will go and recruit from a particular organization. It's not necessarily what you learn in an MBA program, but it's where you got the degree. Okay. Major field of study, the more specialized your knowledge requirements of a particular position, so say you're in the PPA program, the more important your field of major is likely to be a predictor. Okay, so those of you that are going to go and get a master's degree in HR, the knowledge and skills that you develop in the MSHRM program will be a very good predictor for a job if you're, say, applying for an HR generalist job. Again, don't negate them. Extracurricular activities. These are predictors that can, depending on the job, can be used. Training experience requirements, a great deal of weight is often put on training experience. That actions can speak louder than words. Also remember that past performance will predict future performance, or future performance predicts past performance. Licensing, some jobs require those. Some jobs will let you get the license once you are in the position, and then they'll help pay for it. Biographical data or biodata is personal history information on an applicant's background and interest. The assumption here behind the use of biodata is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. This past behavior reflects ability and motivation. If we are looking at a background check while talking about biodata, a background check can turn up buried bones, or bones in the closet, so to speak, of an applicant's background. And that was not necessary. Oh well. Okay. Just be concerned with if you don't rely completely on your bio data that you may get from applicants, because there could be some faking there as well. Backgrounds, checks, background information about job applicants come not only from the applicant but also from people that are controlled by the applicant. Okay, so you need to be mindful of that when you're reading those letters of recommendations. Sometimes letters of recommendations may not help an organization discern the more qualified applicants from the less. Most letters are not structured, they're not standardized, and the data the organization receives is not consistent across the organization. The letter of recommendation has more to do with who wrote the letter than who the letter's being written for. Let's see. A lot of times structured forms are given to letter of recommendation writers. If you ask me to write you a letter of recommendation for the MSHRM program, there is a form that is sent to me. You send it through their application system, and so I have to adhere to that form. Let me see, I think we're okay there. Initial interviews occur very early on. That could even be a phone interview. It's often the applicant's first contact with the organization. It's kind of a rough cut. The purpose is and should be to screen out the obvious cases of person-job mismatch. And you should see those pretty quickly. And a lot of times organizations utilize those resumes to do that. So take advantage of any chance to have FaceTime with recruiters or interviewers at that point. Care should be taken to ensure that the interviewer focuses only on the info as a basis for decision making. Don't wait and utilize just the interview to make your decision, but it kind of helps you decide, do I want to continue this person or not? it is probably one of the most expensive methods of the initial assessment because you are actually having to interview the person via the phone, via video, via face-to-face. Okay. Easy and inexpensive to conduct initial screening interviews if you use videos and computers. Skype is a common platform. Obviously, Zoom is now a big, hot platform. One of the advantages of video-based interviews is they can dramatically lower the cost of the initial interview. So it's not costing anybody a lot of money to do this, other than maybe learning how to do it. And over time, I think the interviewer will get more comfortable with it, and as the interviewees utilize it more in their interviews, they can probably get more comfortable. And so these will become more cost effective in the long haul. Disadvantages that you don't get that face-to-face contact. I mean, we're getting face-to-face here, but it is not the same as like being in the classroom. And I miss the classroom right now. The quality of the video connection can be bad at times, or very poor. Positioning of the computer and camera and different things is also an issue. Okay, evaluations of the initial interviews and guidelines. Ask questions that assess the basic KSAOs. That comes from the job analysis. Stick to the basic qualifying questions. Don't jump off and go into subjective questioning. Stick to your plan. The initial interview is closer to cutting with a saw than operating with a scalpel. So, scalpel. Anyway, so it's like the initial cut. And so you're going to go in there with a chainsaw and kind of, whereas when you get into the more detailed interviews that you actually start doing the real cuts with the real scalpel. Keep them brief and ask all applicants must get the same questions. Don't vary off of your plan when you're doing the interview. Some other things to be mindful of: disclaimers. Organizations will put disclaimers on their applications. They may even have you sign a disclaimer when you go into an interview. It's important for the organization to protect itself legally by clearly identifying the rights it wants to maintain. They're usually written disclaimers, and they provide or confer explicit rights to the employer as part of the employment contract. And those are shown to your job applicants. Some of you may have signed those or had those read to you or something. Most applications have disclaimers on them, so just be mindful of that. There are 3 areas of rights that in a disclaimer notice. It's the employment at will. We've talked about that. Verification consent. You are consenting that they can check and verify the information you give them. And then what will happen if you give a false statement? What are the ramifications? Disclaimer language, it must be very clear, understandable, and very conspicuous to the employee and or applicant. Let's see, reference checks. Gather as much info as possible directly from the applicant. Along with get a verification consent when you do reference checks. Second, be sure to obtain written authorization from the applicant to check those references. Specify the type of information being requested and obtain the information in writing. We don't quite do it that way. We do the letter of recommendation, so that would be, I guess, one way to do it. Here we are. Be wary of info obtained from online social networking. So if you go out there and troll Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and you see some things, and as you were recruiting and checking these people out, because I admit I go out and check out people if they're applying for jobs in management. Limit the access to reference information to those making selection decisions. So don't make notes on an application and then pass that application all around to all your buddies. You just don't do that. You limit it to only the people who are actually making the selection decision. Okay, social media screening, I've already kind of hit on that. We have to be mindful that legally protected characteristics are readily available and visible when we are looking at social media demographics, whether they're pregnant, citizenship, so on and so forth. We got to be careful with that information. If social media information is used, get applicant consent before you do the search. We'll leave it at that. Decide for which specific positions social media info will be sought and used. So even before you ever go out and troll Facebook or whatever it is that is being used these days, I'm still stuck in the Stone Ages with Facebook. Make sure that the applicant knows that. Gather and evaluate only job-related KSAOs. Gather information late in the process only for finalists. Okay? So there's no need to go look at Facebook on everybody unless you're just Curious George, but I still wouldn't do it. Be consistent and standardize the process. Get the same info on everybody, okay? Don't just say, well, I'm going to look at this person because I want to see what kind of person they are and if they, what kind of pictures they got out there or whatever. So be sure to clean up your Facebook as well. Not saying that you guys have anything out there. Allow only HR professionals or other trained people to gather information from social media. Like if you've got your recruiter out there looking, that's not necessarily information that he or she needs to look at. Your HR professional and the hiring manager are probably the people that need to look at that. And then just be sure to follow the law. Be careful with that. American Disabilities Act, the general thrust of the ADA in a selection is an organization may not ask disability-related questions. I know that's a no-brainer. And may not obtain medical examinations until after it is made a conditional offer. And then BFOQs, remember Title VII explicitly permits discrimination on the basis of sex, religion, or national origin if it can be shown to be a BFOQ reasonably necessary to the normal operation of the business. So to successfully defend a BFOQ claim, the organization must show that only or just about only people with the protected class characteristic can do the job, and that the job is integral to the essence and operation of the business. So BFOQ claims that might exceed the bar have involved rationale relating to authenticity, such as male actors for male roles, or public safety requiring certain transportation employees, such as drivers or pilots. I just finished a book, Nerves of Steel, and it was about pilots, and it was a very, very interesting read because the military, with Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, one of the major things she kept coming up against is that women are not supposed to be pilots, especially fighter pilots in the Navy. So if you have time and you want to read a really good book that shows discrimination by our military, and then also with Southwest Airlines, and I always loved Southwest Airlines until I read that book. It's a great book. I bet there'll be a movie about it one of these days. And then also other BFOQs could be like you want to have female guards only for female prisoners. So that is just external selection 1, and it is a lot of what we have already kind of touched on. And the main takeaway is that it's your first cut. And then you are going to utilize the tools, the resumes, the applications, the biographical data, all of that information, you're going to pull it together for each individual candidate, and you're going to make your cut, and then you're going to move into the next tier of the selection process. Okay, that's my first video, and I hope it was at least anything, it provided some entertainment for you. And I'm still working on my technology and trying to get things set up better. And anyway, bear with me. Gig 'em.